You build a bridge, right? The math works and it holds the weight. It's binary.
Right, exactly.
You write a piece of code, it compiles, the program runs, it's clean, it's predictable, and honestly, it's deeply comforting.
Oh, absolutely. It makes sense.
But the second you introduce human beings into the equation, that calculator just shatters. Suddenly, you're navigating this landscape where logic takes a total backseat and traditional rules of engineering just completely fail you.
Well, yeah, because human interaction doesn't run on mathematics.
Right.
It runs on ego, on insecurity,
Mm.
and these deeply ingrained psychological drives.
Right.
And for a long time, we just accepted that this murky landscape was unmappable. Like you're either born a people person or you just weren't.
Yeah, but today on this deep dive, we are completely tearing down the illusion that human behavior is unpredictable. We are uncovering the actual foundational mechanics of human influence.
Which is huge.
It is. We're looking at the real rules for why you do what you do. And, crucially, how you get others to willingly do what you want them to do.
And our source material for this is just a foundational text. We're examining an early, unabridged edition of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Specifically the Cedar Book edition.
Yeah, the 1953 edition. This particular printing marked 5 million copies sold, which is just a staggering number for a manual on human behavior.
5 million. I mean, it sold that many because it made these 12 incredibly audacious promises to the reader.
Right.
It claimed it could pull you out of a mental rut, significantly increase your earning power, make you a better executive, and even transform you into a captivating conversationalist.
Basically promising to hand you the keys to the human operating system.
Exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the weight of those promises, we have to look at the exact moment in history when this text exploded into the public consciousness.
Right. It wasn't born in some comfortable academic ivory tower.
No, not at all.
It was forged in an era of profound real-world desperation.
Yeah, so picture this. A freezing night in January. We are deep in the trenches of the Great Depression.
A really bleak time.
Unbelievably bleak. 20% of the population is completely reliant on relief just to survive. The economic anxiety is palpable, and yet, on this bitter night, 2,500 people have crammed themselves into the grand ballroom of the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York City.
Oh, wow. Just packed in there.
Every single seat is taken. People are standing shoulder to shoulder for an hour and a half. And they aren't there for entertainment. They aren't there to see a movie star. They are there for a course on speaking and influencing people.
That visual tells you everything you need to know about the human condition at that moment.
Doesn't it?
I mean, the industrial age had promised that hard work and technical skill were these guaranteed tickets to security. But the Depression just shattered that illusion. People were realizing that their degrees and their trades weren't enough to save them.
Right. And there was hard data backing up that realization. The University of Chicago and the YMCA ran this massive 2-year, $25,000 survey in Meriden, Connecticut.
Meriden was considered like the quintessential American town at the time.
Exactly. They interviewed every single adult, asking 156 incredibly detailed questions about their lives, their hidden problems, their desires.
And the results were a massive wake-up call to the educational establishment.
Yeah.
When they tabulated what adults actually wanted to learn, the number one interest was health, which, biological survival, that makes perfect sense.
Sure.
But the number two interest was not finance. It wasn't history. It wasn't learning a new trade. Number two was understanding and getting along with people.
They were practically starving for a map of human relations.
Yeah.
And then the Carnegie Foundation drops this bombshell statistic that confirms exactly why the people in that ballroom were so desperate. They studied highly technical fields, places where you'd assume sheer intellect and math rule everything, like mechanical engineering. And they discovered that even there, only about 15% of a person's financial and professional success is due to their technical knowledge,
leaving a massive 85% resting entirely on skill in human engineering.
85%.
Yeah, your personality, your ability to communicate a vision, your capacity to lead people.
John D. Rockefeller, who was arguably the most ruthless, successful businessman of his era, he put it perfectly. He said the ability to deal with people is a purchasable commodity, just like sugar or coffee. And he'd pay more for that specific ability than for anything else under the sun.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think of your brain and your career like a high-end smartphone.
Okay, I like this.
Your technical knowledge, so your engineering degree, your mastery of financial modeling, your coding skills, that is just a single app.
Right.
It might be a brilliant, highly functional app, but human engineering, that is the actual operating system.
Yes. If your OS crashes the moment you have to interact with a difficult client or a resistant team member, it doesn't matter how good the individual app is.
Exactly. You can't even open it. The system just freezes.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. The harsh reality of the business world had deeply disillusioned an entire generation. They realized a college sheepskin was just the app.
Yeah, they were thrust into the rough and tumble of the professional world and found they lacked the operating system. They didn't want high-sounding, abstract psychology. They demanded actionable, functional tools to navigate human friction.
Right. So you would naturally assume the person who finally cracked this code and wrote the definitive manual was some prestigious Harvard psychologist, right?
I think so.
But the irony is that this operating system was mapped out by someone whose own OS had catastrophically failed him early in life.
Yeah, Dale Carnegie wasn't an academic at all. He was a Missouri farm boy who grew up in grinding, relentless poverty.
He picked strawberries for 5 cents an hour, right?
5 cents an hour. He milked cows. He was so poor he had to ride 3 miles on horseback just to get to a local college because he couldn't afford a $1 a day room. He was literally nursing pedigree pigs behind the kitchen stove at 3 a.m. to keep them from freezing.
Wow. And his early years were defined by failure and this overwhelming sense of inadequacy. He was constantly ashamed of his ill-fitting clothes. He suffered from a crippling inferiority complex.
Which is wild to think about now.
Right. I mean, when he tried to sell correspondence courses to ranchers in Nebraska, he failed so spectacularly that he literally broke down and wept in a cheap hotel room.
But that precise failure is the key to his entire methodology. He eventually found his footing selling bacon and soap for Armour and Company in the Badlands. But the real breakthrough happened when he convinced the YMCA in New York to let him teach public speaking for a percentage of the net profits.
Right.
Over his career, he listened to and relentlessly analyzed a staggering 150,000 speeches.
150,000. That isn't a classroom, that's a data factory. That is massive scale A/B testing, decades before the tech industry even coined the term. But wait, how does a guy who initially fails so miserably at selling a simple product end up discovering the ultimate architecture for selling ideas?
Well, because his initial failures stripped away his ego and forced him to develop hyper-empathy.
Ah.
When he stood in front of those nervous professionals at the YMCA, he recognized their terror because he had lived it in that Nebraska hotel room. He realized very quickly that he wasn't teaching elocution or voice projection. He was teaching people how to dismantle their fear of judgment.
And he backed up this massive field testing with obsessive research. For a year and a half, he and a researcher devoured everything they could find. They didn't just read philosophy, they read divorce records.
Right, because a divorce record is basically a legally documented autopsy of a total failure in human engineering.
Exactly. They read over 100 biographies of Theodore Roosevelt alone to reverse engineer his charisma. Carnegie personally interviewed titans like FDR, Clark Gable, Mary Pickford.
And he took all those insights straight back into his laboratory, his classrooms. He didn't publish theories. He published what actually survived contact with reality.
Like the case of Patrick J. O'Hare.
Yes.
He was an Irish immigrant, a mechanic with only 4 years of formal schooling. When he tried to transition into selling trucks, his fear of people was so intense, he would pace outside a prospective buyer's office half a dozen times, sweating, before finding the nerve to open the door.
But by applying Carnegie's mechanics, he didn't just learn to cope. He completely rewired his response to human interaction. He became a Star Trek salesman in New York.
Or look at Godfrey Meyer, a banker with 11 kids who was practically invisible in his own town.
Right.
He used these mechanics to speak up about a local tax bill, and he accidentally got himself elected to the town council.
It just proved the system was scalable and adaptable.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics they uncovered in that laboratory. And the very first, most critical rule of handling people is actually a massive constraint. It's a fundamental don't.
Right. If you want to build influence, you first have to understand what happens to the human ego when it is threatened.
And the source material illustrates this with a sensational piece of history from May 1931. The New York police had cornered a man named Two Gun Crowley.
Oh, this story is wild.
It really is. Crowley was a notorious, ruthless cop killer. He was trapped in a top-floor apartment, surrounded by 150 police officers. It was a literal war zone. They were chopping holes in the roof, deploying tear gas, firing machine guns into the building, while 10,000 spectators watched.
The police commissioner publicly declared Crowley one of the most dangerous criminals in the history of New York. He said the man would kill at the drop of a feather.
Yeah.
And just days prior, a police officer had simply asked for Crowley's license on a quiet road, and Crowley responded by pulling a gun, shooting the officer, grabbing the dying man's own revolver, and shooting him again.
Pure, unadulterated malice.
But here is the critical psychological pivot.
Huh.
How did Crowley view himself? During the siege, while bullets were shredding the apartment, Crowley sat down and wrote a letter. He was bleeding so badly he left a crimson trail on the paper, and he wrote, "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm."
It's absolute cognitive whiplash.
Yes.
The man is actively shooting at 100 cops, and he writes that he has a kind heart.
Hmm.
And later, when he was finally captured and sent to the electric chair in Sing Sing, his final sentiment wasn't remorse. He literally said, "This is what I get for defending myself."
Defending himself. And this phenomenon wasn't unique to Crowley. Al Capone, the most brutal gang leader in Chicago, genuinely viewed himself as a misunderstood public benefactor who was just giving people a good time.
Even Dutch Schultz felt the same way. The warden of Sing Sing, Louis Laws, who dealt with the most hardened criminals in the country, he noted that almost none of them viewed themselves as bad men.
Really?
Yeah, they use highly complex, fallacious reasoning to completely rationalize and justify their antisocial acts.
And John Wanamaker, the great retail pioneer, he realized this early on. He said it's utterly foolish to scold because people simply do not condemn themselves regardless of how wrong they are.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism of rationalization. When you look at history, it's filled with leaders who triggered this firewall and paid the price.
Like Theodore Roosevelt. His criticism of William Howard Taft completely split the Republican Party. But Taft didn't admit he was wrong. He just cried and defended his actions.
Exactly. Or look at the Teapot Dome scandal. Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, took a massive $100,000 loan, basically a bribe from Doheny to lease government oil reserves. It was a blatant betrayal.
Yeah, massive scandal.
But when he was exposed and sent to prison, he never repented. His wife furiously defended him, claiming he was being crucified and that a house full of gold couldn't tempt him to do wrong.
The ego's capacity for self-delusion is just infinite when it's under attack. Which brings us to Abraham Lincoln. We think of Lincoln as this stoic, perfectly balanced leader.
Right, the great emancipator.
But he had to learn this role through near-fatal trial and error. In his youth, Lincoln was incredibly arrogant. He loved to write mocking, sarcastic letters to people who crossed him.
Oh, it was brutal.
Yeah, and in 1842, he pushed it too far. He published an anonymous poem in a newspaper viciously lampooning a fiery Irish politician named James Shields.
And Shields did not take it well.
No, he didn't. Shields tracked down the author, challenged Lincoln to a duel, and Lincoln, trapped by his own pride, accepted. They literally ended up on a sandbar in the Mississippi River, armed with cavalry broadswords, prepared to hack each other to pieces.
Broadswords. It's absurd.
They were only stopped at the absolute last second by their seconds. That moment terrified Lincoln. He realized that his sharp tongue and his brilliant criticisms were essentially weapons of self-destruction.
And from that day on, he never wrote an insulting letter again.
And the ultimate test of that restraint came during the Civil War, right after the Battle of Gettysburg.
This is one of the most brilliant examples of mastering the human operating system. It's July 1863. General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army is retreating in defeat, but they get trapped against the swollen, impassable Potomac River.
Right.
Lincoln sees this from Washington. The war could literally end tomorrow if the Union forces attack. So he orders his commanding general, General Meade, to strike immediately without calling a council of war.
It's the most critical moment of the war, and what does Meade do?
He completely disobeys.
He hesitates. He calls the council. He sends back a flurry of telegraphs making excuses, and the river recedes, allowing Lee's army to escape. Lincoln was absolutely devastated. He cried out, "What does this mean? Great God, what does this mean?"
In a state of profound, justified fury, Lincoln sat down and wrote General Meade a scathing letter. He told Meade that his golden opportunity was gone, that his hesitation was inexcusable, and that Lincoln was immeasurably distressed by the failure.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Meade never read that letter.
Because Lincoln never sent it.
Right. It was found sitting in his papers long after his death. Think about your own unsent letters. The furious Slack message you drafted to a coworker but deleted. The fiery email sitting in your drafts folder right now.
Oh, we all have them.
Lincoln's restraint wasn't just historical trivia. It's a blueprint for modern emotional regulation. Criticisms are like homing pigeons, right? They always return home. When you attack someone, you don't destroy their bad behavior. You just force them to dig their trenches deeper.
Lincoln paused and recognized Meade's reality. Meade had just spent days surrounded by thousands of dead and screaming men at Gettysburg. His perspective was steeped in trauma and exhaustion. Lincoln knew that sending a blistering critique wouldn't change the past. It would only make Meade justify his caution, condemn Lincoln as an armchair general, and potentially resign from the Army when the Union needed him most.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back here. We are talking about literal murderers rationalizing their crimes or generals making massive blunders. But translate that to your everyday life. If someone on your team is making critical coding errors or a vendor is constantly missing deadlines, you have to criticize them. Are you saying we just let it slide to protect their ego? Am I supposed to pretend they aren't failing?
That is the crucial distinction you have to make. There's a massive difference between operational feedback and identity-level criticism. What Carnegie's research uncovered is the neurological reality of rationalization. Criticism isn't a corrective tool. It's a psychological firewall trigger. The moment you attack someone's judgment or character, their brain immediately shuts down incoming traffic. It reallocates all of its cognitive resources to defending the system.
So even if they are 100% wrong, the criticism forces them to double down.
Exactly. When you criticize, you force the other person into a state of cognitive dissonance. To accept your harsh criticism means accepting that they're flawed, which the ego views as a literal survival threat. So they prioritize self-preservation over objective logic.
So if criticism is fundamentally useless because it just causes people to entrench themselves, what actually moves the needle? If you can't force someone to change by pointing out their flaws, how do you influence them?
Well, this brings us to the bedrock of the entire philosophy, the single core driver of all human action. There is only one way under high heaven to get anybody to do anything.
Okay.
And that is by making them want to do it.
You can force compliance temporarily. You can hold a figurative or literal revolver to their ribs. You can threaten to fire them. But that isn't influence, that's coercion.
Exactly. True. Sustainable influence requires giving them what they deeply psychologically crave. Dr. Sigmund Freud famously stated that all human motives spring from two things: the sex urge and the desire to be great.
And philosopher John Dewey reframed it slightly, calling it the desire to be important.
The desire to be important. It sounds so simple, almost trite, honestly. But the sources describe this not as a preference, but as an imperious, gnawing hunger.
Because it is exactly that. As adults, we are remarkably good at satisfying our basic biological needs. We secure food, we find shelter, we sleep, we earn money to protect our children. But this craving for importance, this desperate need to feel that our existence actually matters to someone else, is a psychological starvation that rarely gets fed.
William James, the pioneering psychologist, noted that because this craving goes unfulfilled, most people walk through life half awake, utilizing only a fraction of their mental and emotional resources.
And Lincoln knew the power of this hunger. He once began a letter with the simple, unvarnished truth: everybody likes a compliment.
To understand how powerful this drive is, you just have to look at how people choose to satisfy it. The text provides a deeply contrasting proof. Look at a violent bank robber like John Dillinger,
Right.
and compare him to the ultimate capitalist and philanthropist, John D. Rockefeller.
Oh, this is fascinating. You've Dillinger on one hand, bursting into banks, waving a gun and bragging, "I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm Dillinger."
Right, he's terrorizing people just so they know his name. He is demanding importance through fear.
And on the other hand, you have Rockefeller, who satisfies his craving for importance by financing Admiral Byrd's perilous expedition to the South Pole, ensuring his legacy is tied to human exploration.
They are completely different moral universes, yet they are running on the exact same underlying psychological engine. They are both chasing that feeling of importance.
But this raises an important question. If I know that someone is starving for importance and I give them a compliment or recognize their work just so they will approve my budget or sign my contract, isn't that just pure manipulation?
That's a valid concern.
Are we just pulling levers in a meat machine?
Well, that is the dividing line between cheap flattery and actual influence. If it's entirely transactional and insincere, people will eventually detect the manipulation, and the firewall goes right back up.
Right, they can smell it.
It's exactly. True influence requires authentic observation. It means taking the time to genuinely recognize the value in what someone is doing. When you authentically satisfy that heart hunger for importance, you aren't manipulating them. You are providing psychological oxygen.
Wow, psychological oxygen.
Yeah, and when you give someone oxygen when they're suffocating, you earn a profound, unshakable loyalty.
You essentially hold them in the palm of your hand, not because you trapped them, but because you are the rare person who actually sees them.
Exactly.
We have unpacked a tremendous amount of the human operating system today. We started in that freezing, packed ballroom during the Great Depression, witnessing a society desperate for tools beyond mere technical skill.
Right.
We traced Dale Carnegie's journey from the brutal failures of his early sales career to the massive 150,000 speech laboratory where he decoded empathy.
And we examined the terrifying self-delusion of criminals like Two Gun Crowley to understand the biological reality of cognitive dissonance. We saw how the brain prioritizes defending the ego over accepting objective reality.
And we learned from Abraham Lincoln's evolution. From a man willing to fight a duel over a sarcastic poem, to a master strategist who could swallow his entirely justified rage and leave a critical letter to General Meade sitting in a desk drawer.
All of this points to the ultimate architectural secret of human behavior: the desperate, driving craving to feel important.
The application for you is immediate. The next time you sit down to draft that blistering email to an underperforming vendor, or you feel the urge to snap at a colleague who dropped the ball, picture Lincoln's unsent letter.
Yes, that's such a great takeaway.
Recognize that sending your criticism will only trigger their psychological firewall. Instead of kicking over the beehive, pause and ask yourself the harder, much more effective question. How can I interact with this person in a way that authentically satisfies their desire to be important while still solving the problem?
It fundamentally rewires how you approach every conflict.
It really does. And it leaves you with a final, rather provocative thought to mull over. If the deepest, most imperious urge in human nature is this desire to be important, how's our modern digital landscape warping that craving?
Well, that's a big question.
We live in a hyper-connected world explicitly engineered to dispense cheap, artificial hits of importance through likes, views, and follower counts. Are we inadvertently engineering a society of Dillinger's people desperate to be known and validated at any cost?
Or can we leverage these exact same mechanics to build a society of Rockefellers, recognizing and elevating genuine contribution?
It really makes you wonder if that human operating system is functioning exactly as it did in 1931, or if we are currently stress testing it in ways it was never designed to handle.
A critical question for anyone trying to navigate today's world.
Indeed. Keep analyzing the system and keep those letters in your drafts.